What's up, y'all? You're listening to the Miami Nation podcast. I'm Alex Miller, joined always by Robert Cessna. Cease, A&M coming off a big win at at home against LSU. Hello. Fact checking here on a
there you go.
Wednesday afternoon. Now they got to go on a road and probably play maybe the most difficult game of the season at South Carolina. Pesky team, night game in a hostile environment off a big win. We're going to find out if A&M's the real deal on Saturday, aren't we?
Yeah, I always have to love people when they talk about trap games. And we've used the word trap probably I'm talking about everyone about probably 3 times this year. It's not really a trap game when you have as much riding on the line as A&M and they realize how tough it is to win at South Carolina. So it's only a trap game if they lose, so to speak. But I guarantee you Elko's had their attention. This is no trap game. They're playing like maybe the SEC title's on the line.
Yeah, well, we asked him on the SEC teleconference today, what's the focus level at practice this week? He said it's pretty good. So, that's what he can say. We're going to find out on Saturday how dialed in A&M is. And, of course, the big question mark is who's going to start at quarterback for the Aggies? Cease, as you've had a few days to think about what both guys brought to the table against LSU and how A&M might match up against South Carolina, where do you think A&M should go and what they might do with that and the consequences of that decision?
Well, the fact that I'm already 0 for 1 because I had Reed starting against Missouri the last time we were on this, so you could say, like, you'll go the opposite way or I'm due. And as I studied, I'm really in the middle of looking at South Carolina. My week is really Wednesday, Thursday. I really focus in on the other team. First of all, just looking at A&M, what Reed did Saturday night in such a small sample time and so good, and considered now that Weigman has struggled really in 2 games, the Mississippi State game and the LSU game. I think from the A&M standpoint, you would go with Reed. And then when I look at the matchups, which I've just got into a little bit today, I knew South Carolina was really good on defense, but I didn't realize how good they are, considering they've played Alabama, LSU, and I think it was they played 3 good teams, offensive teams, and they've done really well. And so with that in mind I think if I'm Elko and Klein, I'm a little worried about turnovers because it's easy to say if A&M plays their game, they could win by 2 or 3 touchdowns, but with turnovers a problem, and the fact that Reed's protected the ball so well, I would lean towards Reed.
I think South Carolina played Ole Miss is maybe the team you're thinking of.
I said Ole Miss,
LSU,
Alabama, those 3, not Georgia. Alabama, LSU. That's 3 good offensive teams, and you look at their defensive numbers, and a lot of times those are against cupcakes. Not the case with South Carolina.
Well, I think the thing that can be said is A&M's probably not going to catch South Carolina totally off guard by whoever they start at quarterback this week, because South Carolina was off last week. They had a whole week to prepare for Weigman, and now they get a whole week to prepare if Reed is the quarterback. And whereas Drinkwitz, whether he was lying or not, said straight to the media, hey, we think Reed's going to start. And then, lo and behold, Weigman goes out there and tears them apart. I don't think LSU expected Marcel Reed to go into the game, and then when he did, they couldn't find any kind of answer. I don't think Shane Beamer is going to be caught off guard necessarily at who's going to start at quarterback this week. What do you think?
I don't think so, and it's interesting looking back on the LSU because a lot of people said, LSU wasn't prepared for Marcel Reed. They were just coming off a week where they put the clamps on Tylen Green, who is a dual-threat quarterback as well, but at Arkansas, but definitely not in the league, I feel, of Reed, and particularly with Reed's got a little more experience. So that being said, in twofold on that, number one, I thought LSU playing Arkansas should have been ready a little bit for that. But on the flip side is if Elko's being honest with us, and I don't know why he would, he said if he changes quarterbacks, it doesn't really change a lot of the nuances of their offense. It's not like they have to learn a new offense. And I agree with them to a certain extent. While we've been able to see they call a lot of the same plays, it's like maybe Reed is not as successful in those 12 to 20-yard passes where Wegman, when he's on, is able to complete those. So that being said, I don't think there's maybe that much variance if you're offense or defense who's playing. It's who's executing, because very obviously Wegman wasn't executing anything. And then, you see Marcel Reed comes in. Yeah, he completed 2 of 2 passes, but he made the right reads on the rushing as well. So I think they'll be ready. In South Carolina, one thing I give them a good check mark is I'm impressed over the years with Shane Beamer as a coach. Not that I'm not impressed with Brian Kelly as well, but I think when the game ends, whoever wins or loses, I don't think Shane Beamer would say we weren't ready.
Shane Beamer's teams are normally very opportunistic. We were sitting at the burger joint there in Starkville watching them beat down on Oklahoma, and, 2 non-offensive touchdowns really put Oklahoma in a bind. When A&M went to South Carolina last time, A&M found itself in a hole pretty early because of a kickoff return, and then, a pick six or a fumble return?
I think it might have been a fumble return.
Either way, South Carolina, opportunistic team. How important is it going to be for A&M to not play dumb and to take care of itself? And, you yourself asked Elko about some of the dumb penalties after the game, or after the play, that may have not cost A&M to this point, but if they keep doing them, at some point could catch up with them.
Well, which Shane Beamer learned from his dad, Frank Beamer, special teams matter. It's the third phase, and it's stronger than ever. And usually when Shane Beamer and South Carolina play, they have the check mark every time in special teams. You can see that in the Oklahoma game. You can see that in a lot of their games. But A&M is really good in special teams this year, and they need to remain that way. That's number one. Number two, A&M has committed way too many penalties. If they'd end up losing the game to LSU, which they didn't, you could say, oh, look at the penalties they made. They have made a lot of stupid penalties that haven't cost them. That's very unusual, but shows you how good they are playing. So when you look at hidden yards, A&M in all their games they've won, this 7-game winning streak, they've won the hidden yards except for the penalty yards. They've won all the special teams. They can't expect to go on the road and overcome those kind of mistakes if they continue to make them. And I'm kind of surprised that some of the bad plays they made when it comes to unsportsmanlike conduct, hitting a guy well after the play, at home, the procedure penalties. Now, they're going to have problems. They might have some procedural penalties just because of South Carolina's crowd, but you shouldn't have those at home.
This is going to be a very intriguing matchup for A&M's offensive line. You alluded to how good South Carolina is on defense. I think they're second in the SEC in sacks. Mm-hmm. They've got the number 3 sack guy in the country with the transfer from Georgia Tech and Kennard. The freshman that they've got, he is going to be a force to be reckoned with in the years to come. But A&M's offensive line continues to have to tap into its depth. It's something I'm writing about for Thursday's paper. What struck you about the way A&M's had to go into that depth, and do you feel like the level of play has been maintained over the weeks, even though they've had to go into 6, 7, 8 guy?
I think this is a little bit of an acid test, only because you listen to Elko. Zune was the offensive line player of the week for like the 18th week out of 7, 8 weeks. And he said Crownover had his best game ever, but he didn't mention Shanahan, who filled in for Busantes, who was a great loss. A&M's offensive line didn't look the greatest for the first 2 quarters and 2 drives, which coincided with Wegman struggling as they tried to throw the ball a lot. That being said, as soon as Reed came in, the offensive line kind of picked it up and played well. What I'm trying to get to in a long way is I think South Carolina will try to exploit that line. I think they'll try to stay away from Zune. I think they'll try to get a lot of pressure up the middle, possibly, see what they can do. So once again, you're right, Alex, A&M's offensive line gets kudos, for the way they've handled losing Naboo and losing Busantes. But how can you keep losing those guys? But that's the sign of a championship team when you can do that. This to me is going to be another test, because once again Beamer's had 2 weeks to prepare. Like, hey, look, they're missing 2 of their starting offensive linemen. Both guys are up the middle. How can we exploit that?
Sticking with offense, something you and I talked about throughout the game on Saturday was A&M really struggled to find success throwing the ball on first down, often put A&M behind the change on second down, and really made them predictable on what they were going to do. Seemed like every time they were in second and 8 or longer, it seemed like A&M just either ran a counter or tried to run something between the tackles. And while LSU may not have gotten some tackles for loss, A&M was only getting 1 to 3 yards, and it really put them into passing down situations on third down, which LSU really exploited early in the game. What do you need to see from A&M, do you think, to try and keep things on page and on balance on offense down to down?
Well, that was an interesting deal to study because we all know that Colin Kine's pretty respected as an offensive coordinator and a planner, and we've seen A&M score on a lot of their first drives this year. But what was amazing was they were something like they only had success out of like 3 out of 11 of the first 11 first downs. And so that's why they were one reason they were losing. They're always behind. But they kept throwing a lot on first down because their scouting report said those plays were open, but Wegman and his receivers couldn't deliver. So instead of getting another first down or getting 2nd and 1, 2nd and 2, they had 2nd and 10, and they kept failing. But they kept doing it because that's what the whole week dealt. So I'll be very interested to see the game plan because you can tell what a team's game plan is. And I think I'll be like a coach. But, man, when you look at South Carolina's numbers, it's got to be balanced. You got to be able to run and throw because they've got great numbers. So how does A&M throw or how does A&M run? I mean, do they run jets? They run in the middle? They run outside? Once again, Klein has done a great job on first series, except last week. Last week stood out like a thumb, so I'm anxious to see what happens.
Only the second time this season A&M hadn't gotten any points on their first drive of the game. You mentioned the jet sweep. Doesn't seem like A&M throws a lot of screen passes, but they do run the jet sweep quite a bit. And, it was interesting hearing Elko explain what they needed to see on the offensive side to make a run down this final month of the season. And it's all about timing, it seems like. The quarterback's time is right and the offensive line timing is right, the receivers are out of sync or vice versa. And so it just seems like A&M just needs to sync itself up a little better in order to get into a flow of things. And for whatever reason, it just hadn't really happened so far this season.
Yeah, when you watched last week's game, I thought on both times, I think it was 2 or 3 times, when Reed handed off to the wide receiver on the jet sweep or whatever, it just seemed like it was quicker than when Wegman does it. And once again, he's a quick, more of a wiry guy and can get it done. And that's just those little seances when you look at something. Whereas just that split second might turn a 1-yard loss into a 7-8 yard gain. It's amazing when you see that. And it was like when Reed walked in the game, suddenly everything was clicking for A&M when it looked like, it just was a round hole going into the square peg and all that. And you're right. When you see it, you go, wow, that's the way it should look. But yet, and you can see why coaches struggle. They go, why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? And it all gets, sometimes writers do sound like coach speaks. It's just about consistency. And I give Wegman a little bit of a pass because he missed 3 games. If he'd had those 3 games, and I think Reed is so much better because he did have those 3 games. And so it's a real fun. It's a great situation for A&M to be in. Considered they don't know where they're decide on quarterback, but they're the number 10 team in the nation.
I think you meant to say nuance instead of seance.
Yeah, well, nuances and seances. Who knows what I meant to say? Anybody that knows I don't know the difference from either one of them.
On the other side of the ball, it's going to be interesting because South Carolina has shown flashes on offense, but man, they're kind of a mystery on that side of the ball. And Lenora Sellers, he's been battling some injuries this season. Depending on how this goes, it could be kind of a low-scoring affair, maybe like 24-20. I don't know what you're thinking on your score prediction for Saturday's game day edition yet.
Yeah, I think it's going to be short, lower, because I do like the running back if he's healthy. The kid from Arkansas, he can be a load, and he's had some success against A&M in the past. And I think South Carolina become very close to the vest, because I think when you look at the turnovers, they cannot give A&M a short field, because you look. I think if I'm Shane Beamer, you want to make A&M have to drive a lot, because maybe they're not going to get it done. So I think right off the bat, I don't think there's going to be any need for either team to take chances right off the deal. But who's going to get that big play? Sometimes you make a turnover because you're trying to be too conservative. So I'll be real interested to see how they attack A&M, because we've seen people have success. Why do people? It's the big play. Even when LSU, they made some big plays, but they couldn't make the small plays. And I don't think South Carolina, from what I could see, is built to be a big play offense. But I think that's how you exploit A&M, and you think, wow, you get 2 or 3 plays, you might get 17, 20 points. So once again, I'll be interested to see how Shane Beamer attacks this A&M defense when we know the defensive line is one of the best in the country.
Well, it's going to be a rowdy game over at Williams-Brice Stadium. It always is. Sold-out crowd, 7:45 local kick. I mean, it's gonna be a spooky night over there in Columbia.
I like the spooky. And you think about it, we've never even mentioned the significance of playing for the Bonham Trophy. I hope I've announced that right.
Oh my! You did announce it.
Whether
right.
it's nuances or seances, I don't think anybody wants the Bonham Trophy.
It is real. It is real. I have seen it.
I think it's in the house of one of our former employees, Travis Brown. I think it's in his house. It could be. His wife might not like that, but I think that's where it's at.
Well, guess we'll have to go get it from Travis and bring it to the game for once. But hey, that's all we got. And before we go, an early happy birthday to the man, the myth, the legend, Robert Cessna, turning a young 27 years old. Hey, I'm going to turn 27 next year too, so that's crazy that we're the same age.
Ooh, and Alex is pretty sharp. He knows if you switch the numbers around, they're all there.
Be sure to check theeagle.com for all of our coverage of A&M's game against South Carolina. We'll be back next week on the Miami Nation Podcast.